have John Piprani, who is going to speak to us about...
No, they were notes for the other
Just checking. Get someone to share your seat for the time being. There you go.
John is going to speak to us about Matterport technology and technology for accessibility within heritage. John spends a lot of time on the technician and the academic side of his role, looking a lot at the making of and the tools, looking at a lot of stone tools in the past as well, and moved into the Matterport side of things. Was it spurred on by a lot of the pandemic?
Yeah.
Yeah.
Which
he's going to talk about today. So capturing the past.
Okay, so mine's new digital technology, thinking about new heritage narratives, and hopefully that'll become clear. So my 15 minutes, it's in 4 parts. COVID, museum studies and Matterport, how it got going. Curate and some of the uses, curating temporary space and events, making listed buildings accessible, and decolonising museum objects and spaces. So a little bit of a parallel with what Juan was talking about. The image on the right is an Australian Aboriginal Kimberley point. So it's a point made out of glass. It was made out of glass, ceramic and stone, I think from 1880 to about 1980. And I'm going to talk about that within the presentation a little bit later. So, COVID, museum studies and Matterport. So I'm an archaeology technician, and this is more representative of what I normally do. So I have to manage vehicles, students and equipment on fieldwork projects. But in 2020 with lockdown, what it meant was that our archaeology department couldn't do any field work. So I was effectively redundant. I was still paid, but I spent 10 weeks in my backyard learning how to make stone tools. But then my colleagues lent me to Kostas, who works in museum studies, and he's literally on the floor below where I work. He was concerned that his museum study students weren't going to get access to any cultural institutions, which they needed in order to progress through the course. So Kostas was able to get funds to get hold of this technology called Matterport 3D scanning technology, generally used within real estate for scanning space, producing digital models, selling space. So it's a very commercial product, it's very easy to use. Kostas got the equipment, but then he needed somebody to use it, to go around the institutions and make scans. So that became my job. And we've carried on with it because it's such a great tool and it's such a great project. So it started in 2020 as a sort of have-to project, but we've continued it. If you're interested in looking at the scans, I've not attempted to put any links into my PowerPoint for obvious reasons. But if you want to Google University of Manchester virtual tours Matterport, you'll come to this page. It's got, I think, about 11 on. We've done about 20 scans altogether. 11 are finished and all. And I'll now go talk a little bit about the actual nuts and bolts of it. So the actual hardware it's relatively simple to use. So we've got a scanner, which you can see on the screen, tripod. Scanner is a laser scanner. It also takes photos. It sits on the tripod, and you operate it with an iPad and an app. So it's fairly portable. How do you use it? Obviously, you get to the venue, you assemble the equipment. Ideally, every 2 meters, you take a scan. You use the iPad to press the button, does a 360 rotation, it scans the space, and it photographs the space. And every 2 meters, you move through the space until you've captured it. So what you're actually doing there is 3 things. You're giving it enough information to know what the space is that it's occupying. And it does that through the lasers. But you're also thinking about what is the journey that the virtual visitor is going to make. So you have to have that in mind before you start the scan. So if there's particular things you want them to pay attention to, that is going to be a location for the scan. Once you've mapped out the space and you've completed the virtual visitor route, then you can think about scan density. The more scans you've got, the smoother the process is for the virtual visitor. So you can polish it off at the end. So it uses lasers, it uses a system called structured light, and that's what it uses to measure the space. And it creates a point cloud or a model. It also photographs, and then it hangs those photographs onto the model to create the 3D effect. So the result, a metrically accurate reproduction of 3D space. The metrically accurate thing is useful on a number of practical levels, but it's not as relevant for the way we're using it. One of the key things in relation to what I'm talking about is that you can embed media into the 3D models. So you can create a model of the space, people can explore it, but you can also embed images, video, sound, text. So you can use the model to tell a story in its own right. So that's some background to the equipment and how it started. One of the things that we've been using it for, so these are actual scans that we've done, curating temporary space and events. So one of the first ones we did during lockdown was Band on the Wall. They got some money to extend the stage area, and what they wanted was a scan to capture how it was, or how it was when they wanted it scanning. So we went and we scanned the space. It's not a massive space, so it wasn't too difficult. We were able to learn a few things in doing it. So this is a scan of the stage, as you can see, and the little blue dots are called matter tags. It's a brand name, but if you were to hover your mouse, if you're looking at it on a laptop, over the dot, a new window emerges, and in that window, in this instance, it's a YouTube video of a band that have performed on that stage. So you can actually embed past events into your virtual model. If you imagine the matter tag on the far left, just on the wall, if you click on that, that takes you to their Band on the Wall website, where they've got a tab for the history of the building. And this is an interesting photograph because you can actually see the band on the wall, which is where the name comes from. So they're using the virtual space to record events that have happened there, so particular bands, but also to record the history of the building within this virtual environment. A second one that we've done relatively recently, this isn't finished yet, but it was a really interesting exhibition to work on. Nothing About Us Without Us. So disabled people's activism, past, present and future. So this is a temporary exhibition. It's a really good exhibition, and the idea is that we've now captured it and we can recreate it for virtual visitors. And this was really interesting for us. A bit reflective, a bit like Lam was describing when with the human zoo kind of thing. But the exhibition's designed to be super accessible for obvious reasons. The way that it's laid out to allow wheelchair access around. So with the Matterport scanner, it's designed for an average person. The average person being about 5'8". So the scanner operates at eye level. If you set it up with its standard format. But for this, we were able to think through that and lower it down so the whole of the scan is done at a wheelchair user's height. And the exhibition was designed for that kind of experience. But it's made us think about what would a child's perspective of a space be. You can start to play with the technology a bit more creatively. You don't have to just set it up and do the scan and go home again. So the second example is making listed buildings accessible. This is a project we started, but we haven't finished. So working at this place, Hall in the Wood in Bolton, and I was working with a second year student, Leo, who's a wheelchair using student. So obviously going on field work to Hereford where we normally go, it's not really practical. But Leo was really interested in something called witch marks. I don't know if anybody's familiar with witch marks. Symbols that are generally in older buildings on windows and doors, thought to be a way of keeping out evil spirits from the building. So we thought this could be a really nice piece of field work, scanning the building, photographing the witch marks and putting them together to do an accessible witch mark tour. As you can see, it is a totally inaccessible building if you've got any mobility issues at all. So we've done the scan, we've taken photographs of the witch marks. Unfortunately, we haven't finished the project because the student, for various reasons, wasn't able to commit to it. We've got it, we can do something with it, we've just not worked out how we want to do that. What's really interesting about this is that this is a real problem. Listed buildings cannot be adapted. So this is a model that could be reproduced again and again and again and increase accessibility for these kinds of buildings. So the final section is imaginary, really. These are ideas that we've got that we haven't done anything with yet, but I think has got great potential. So decolonising, it's very popular at the moment, but what does it actually mean? Colonisation, this is a dictionary definition, to settle a place or region with colonists as part of an effort by a state or ruler to appropriate the area. So what does decolonise mean? To free an institution, sphere of activity, one's mind, or a space, place, from cultural or social effects of colonisation. So how does that relate to heritage? So coming back to Kimberley Points, produced by Aboriginal Australians, once settlers have arrived, bringing new materials such as glass, these became really collectible commodities for Europeans. So most large museums have got collections of them either on display or in their stores. So these are this is the inventory from Manchester Museum. Some interesting questions. Who was Robert Duckenfield Derbyshire? Who was Frederick Wood Jones? They were the people who donated the items to the museum. No information about any Aboriginal maker, context, anything like that. Purely the person whose collection was donated to the museum. Why was one found in the zoology department? Perhaps because Aboriginal people were seen as part of the natural history of Australia until relatively recently. So decolonising means thinking about how the objects that museums hold are recorded, what stories are they telling. So I went to the Liverpool World Museum in 2019 and I went on a Untold Histories of Empire tour with Dina Heath, who was running it. I can't remember what the event was. And essentially it was she'd selected 10 objects that were within her realm of knowledge and was presenting a different history to the one presented by the museum. So, for example, at the Liverpool World Museum, they've got lots of examples of different timbers, which could be argued that they're adding to the sum of scientific knowledge. What Dina was arguing was they've created a physical database of exploitable resources that can be located around the world, and then you can go and get them. So she was recontextualising the things that were there and how they were described and how they were explained. This was on display, this hunting knife that's got a tiger bone handle, and the story of the hunting and killing of the tiger is engraved on the handle of the knife. As Dina pointed out, it's estimated that in India, the British hunted and killed at least 50,000 tigers before 1875 and 1925, bringing tigers to the edge of extinction. So she's interested in this colonial mindset and the kind of activities that go along with it. So this was a really stimulating tour for me. And having had experience with Matterport, I think it would fit really well. Literally overwrite the narratives that we're presented with when we go around the museum within a digital tour of the museum. The final bit, space. So Jabulo is our living cultures curator at Manchester. And he's really interested in this idea of decolonisation, but his method is slightly different to Dina's. So he's looking at the objects that the museum holds and looking for diaspora populations in Manchester and trying to connect them with the objects and getting them to do the research and tell the stories about the objects that have cultural meaning to them, as opposed to having an expert curator doing the research and then telling people what the object is about. So, again, really interesting stuff that he's doing. But this is a visit he's doing next week, and it's a visit to the stores. Now, normally you don't get access to the stores, especially not if you're a member of the public. So this is the store space is an ideal space to scan, because then people can get virtual access to it without having to go through the physical process of getting down there. And also, he can then bring those stories together that he's constructing and embed them, so we get an alternative explanation of the things like the Kimberley points that are in the stores that people don't normally get to see. And when they do get to see them, they only get a very limited explanation of what they are. All right, so that's my bit. Thanks to Costas for initially getting me involved in the project, and thanks to Keith for inviting me to speak.
Oh, brilliant. Thank you so much, John. Amazing to think about accessibility in so many ways, how getting spaces to be seen and experienced in 360, but also objects that can have stories attached to them.